The water is black, cold. It seeps into leather. It numbs the bone. A fog hangs low. It clings to the cypress knees. The air tastes of mud and pine. A sound carries through the mist. Distant, unsettling. Something is coming. Death is coming. The men wait, hidden behind a low ridge of grass covered dirt. They grip their flintlocks. Their knuckles are white. They are outnumbered. They are outgunned. But they hold the ground. They hold the bridge. The creek is their killing floor. They have prepared it. They have greased the log stringers. They have waited all through the frigid Monday night. Now, in the foggy pre dawn of February 27th, 1776, they listen. The war is coming to them, down a swampy, wet road, through the dark, swampy creek. It comes with the martial strains of the pibroch. It comes for the king. This wasn't supposed to be a war of swamps and backwater creeks. It was meant to be a grand restoration of royal authority, a decisive blow orchestrated from the relative comfort of a warship. From the deck of the HMS Cruiser, anchored off the mouth of the Cape Fear River, the exiled royal governor Josiah Martin spun his ambitious web. He saw North Carolina ripe for the taking, a colony where loyalty to the crown was not yet extinguished, but merely dormant, waiting for a spark. He wrote pleading, persuasive letters to his superiors in London and New York, sketching out a three-pronged strategy that seemed on paper to be foolproof. He would rally the loyal subjects of the back country, particularly the Highland Scots settled around Cross Creek, who still felt the sting of their oaths to the crown after the disaster at Culloden. This formidable local force, he promised, would march to the coast, securing the interior and crushing any rebel militia that dared to stand in their way. As they arrived in Wilmington, they would be met by a powerful British army under Major General Henry Clinton, arriving by sea to consolidate the victory and reestablish Martin's government. It was a plan born of desperation and arrogance, a belief that the revolutionary fever was a coastal malady that hadn't yet infected the hardy soul of the piney woods. On January 10th, he issued his call to arms, and to his delight, the plan seemed to work. About 1,600 men, primarily proud Scots who carried the memory of other failed rebellions, answered his call. They were not a regular army. Most had no formal training as soldiers, and only about 500 even possessed firearms. Their real weapons were their dirks, their faith in the crown, and the terrifying reputation of their traditional Scottish broadswords, the claymores, which they brought to this new world conflict. Opposing them was not a unified army, but a patchwork of patriot militia, colonists who now saw themselves as defenders of a nascent liberty. Colonel James Moore commanded the 1st North Carolina Regiment, a more disciplined force, while Colonel Richard Caswell and Colonel Alexander Lillington led bodies of minute men, farmers, artisans, and frontiersmen who left their homes with whatever hunting equipment they owned. They understood the terrain in a way no governor on a ship ever could. They knew the swampy ground, the 50-foot wide creek crossings, the marshy areas that could swallow a column of marching men. Their strategy was one of delay and attrition, using the landscape itself as a weapon. As the Loyalists marched south from Cross Creek, Moore skillfully blocked their preferred route, forcing them onto an alternate path through the treacherous swamps, a path that would inevitably lead them to a critical choke point, a low wooden bridge spanning the black water of the Widow Moore's Creek. The very geography of North Carolina was now conspiring to funnel these two opposing wills toward a single unavoidable confrontation. The march was a miserable affair. Bone-chilling temperatures settled over the land as the Loyalists slogged through the swampy terrain that hindered their every step. They were confident, however, believing the rebels were in full retreat before them. Their scouts had seen the fires of Colonel Caswell's campsite, a clear sign of an army on the run. What they didn't know was that they were being lured into a trap. Caswell had deliberately left his campfires burning through the night, a classic deception to mask his true movement. While the Loyalists slept, dreaming of a glorious link-up with Clinton's regulars in Wilmington, Caswell's men were quietly slipping away, moving to the east bank of Moore's Creek to join Colonel Lillington's forces. There, on a sandy bluff overlooking the creek, the patriots dug in. They constructed a strong earthwork, a low ridge of dirt and logs, perhaps 4 feet high and 7 feet wide, with a ditch in front. It was a hasty defense, but it commanded the bridge perfectly. They had chosen their ground. As a final vicious touch, they pulled up the wooden planking of the bridge, leaving only the two long log stringers spanning the dark water. Then they coated those beams with soap and animal fat, turning the only path across the creek into a treacherous, slippery balance beam. All that was left was to wait. Behind those earthworks, 1,000 patriots checked their flintlocks, loaded their muskets with ball and swan shot, and aimed their two small cannons, a 3-pounder nicknamed Mother Covington and a smaller half-pounder, directly at the far end of the sabotaged bridge. They waited for the war notes of the pibroch to be born on the morning breeze through those primeval woods. The fog is thick. Vague shapes appear at the far side of the bridge. The skirl of bagpipes cuts the air. King George and broadswords. The sound grows louder, more confident. The loyalists have arrived. They see the abandoned entrenchment on their side of the creek. They believe the patriots have fled. This is the final obstacle. A small party of men is sent forward. Captain Donald MacLeod leads them, a bridegroom of only a few weeks. He holds his claymore high. 80 men follow him, belted chieftains. They step onto the long, narrow, dark causeway. The greased log stringers. Some men slip. They fall into the cold black water. It is 5 feet deep. It can rise with the tide. MacLeod keeps his footing. He is halfway across. He raises his sword. He shouts their slogan, their war cry. King George and broadswords. A bugle blast is blown from the patriot line. An alert gun is sounded. The earthworks erupt. Fire, smoke, a deafening blast. The sound is like thunder. Mother Covington speaks. The half-pounder daughter answers. Grape shot and swan shot tear through the fog. It rips through the pine branches. It scythes through the charging Highlanders. Men scream. They fall from the greased logs. They disappear into the creek. Captain MacLeod stops. He stands for a moment, a statue in the smoke. His body is riddled with bullets. 20 musket balls, 9 bullets, 24 swan shot. The numbers don't matter. He is dead before he hits the water. His claymore sinks into the mud. The charge breaks. It never reaches the bank. The loyalists on the far side stare. They see the slaughter. They see their comrades drowning. They hear the muskets. They hear the rifles. They hear the shouting. Many turn. They run. The patriots are stunned. The fight lasted 3 minutes. They leap over their earthworks. They give chase. The battle becomes a hunt. Through the swamps. Through the piney woods. Some loyalists fight, hand to hand to teeth. A Whig bites a loyalist into submission. The flight is a rout. The victory is total. 30 loyalists are dead. More are wounded. Hundreds are captured. A box of gold is found. Half Johannes's and Guineas, meant to pay for a war that never happened. The patriot losses are counted. 1 man killed, 1 man wounded. Governor Martin's grand plan is shattered. His army is gone. When General Clinton finally arrives, he finds no one to meet. He sails away. The rebellion in North Carolina is not crushed. It is emboldened. A 3-minute fight over a greased bridge in a forgotten swamp ended the royal government's power in the colony forever. It proved that a new kind of war had begun. A war fought not by armies in formation, but by angry men hiding behind dirt, willing to turn their own land into a weapon.